The morning sun poured through the tall windows of Bright Horizons kindergarten, casting golden streaks across the colorful play mats and tiny wooden chairs. The room smelled of crayons, glue, and the faint sweetness of apple juice. Small children bustled around, their laughter mixing with the clatter of plastic building blocks and the rustle of storybook pages being turned by tiny hands. It was a scene of innocence, untouched by the noise of the outside world. That was until he walked in. The heavy door at the entrance swung open, and a hush fell over the room. A group of adults in dark suits entered first, their earpieces glinting under the fluorescent lights, scanning the space with quick, practiced movements. And then, stepping in behind them, was a figure who seemed almost out of place in the midst of it all, Donald Trump. Dressed in a navy blue suit, his signature red tie perfectly knotted, he moved with the confidence of a man who had walked into rooms far more hostile than this. But here, in the middle of tiny desks and shelves filled with stuffed animals, there was no debate stage, no political battle, just wide-eyed children staring at him as if he had stepped out of a television screen. A little boy, no older than 4, tugged on his teacher's sleeve. "Is he a president?" The boy whispered. The teacher hesitated, glancing at the suited men who flanked the doorway. "He was," she said softly. "And maybe. He will be again." Trump surveyed the room, hands in his pockets, before flashing a grin. "Now this," he said, "this is the future of America right here." His voice carried just enough strength to command attention, yet there was warmth in it, something real. A few teachers exchanged nervous glances. It wasn't every day that one of the most talked about men in America showed up in a kindergarten classroom. They had been informed of the visit only hours before, given strict instructions to continue their day as normal. But how could anything be normal when Donald Trump was standing among finger-painting toddlers? He took a step forward, scanning the room, his sharp eyes locking onto a little girl sitting alone at a small table by the window. She had soft curls of golden hair, and her striped dress made her look like she had stepped straight out of a storybook. Unlike the other children who whispered and giggled, she simply stared at him, curious, unafraid. Trump approached, kneeling down beside her, his hands resting on his knees. "What's your name, sweetheart?" The little girl blinked, then said, "Emma." Trump nodded approvingly. "Emma? That's a strong name." He glanced at the open book in front of her. "The little engine that could." He smirked. "You know, I like this one. It's about winning." Emma tilted her head. "You read it?" "Oh, I've read it," he said, tapping the page lightly. "And let me tell you something, Emma. This little train?" People told him he couldn't do it. They said, "No way. You're too small, too weak." He leaned in slightly. "But he didn't listen, did he?" Emma shook her head. Trump smiled. "Exactly. He said, 'I think I can. I think I can,' and guess what? He did." Emma studied him for a moment, then looked back at her book. She ran her tiny finger across the picture of the determined little train chugging up the hill. Trump straightened slightly. "You know, Emma, people told me I couldn't do a lot of things. They said I wouldn't win. They said America was finished. They said the economy was done. The country was too divided." He shook his head. "But we proved them wrong, didn't we?" Emma, not entirely sure what economy meant, simply nodded. Behind him, a journalist cleared his throat. The press pool, who had been allowed limited access, were seated toward the back, observing every move. "Mr. President," the journalist called, "some are saying this visit is politically motivated, that you're here as part of a strategy to appeal to young families ahead of your potential campaign." Trump didn't look away from Emma. "You know," he said, as if the question hadn't fazed him in the slightest, "it's funny how people always try to spin things, He gestured around the room. Look at these kids. They don't know politics. They don't know the nonsense that goes on in Washington. But what they do know is fairness, hard work, and believing in yourself. He stood up slowly, buttoning his jacket. If coming here, talking to the future of our country, is a problem for some people, maybe they're the ones who need to rethink their priorities. A murmur ran through the room. The teachers who had initially been skeptical now exchanged quiet nods. Trump turned his attention back to Emma. He pointed to her book. You remember this story, okay? And if anyone ever tells you that you can't do something, what do you say? Emma hesitated then, almost in a whisper, said, I think I can. Trump grinned. That's right. Then, as if satisfied, he turned and strode toward the door. His security detail immediately moved into position, the press scrambling for final shots, more questions. Just before he stepped out, he glanced back over his shoulder. Emma was still watching him, her little hands gripping the edges of the book. He gave her a wink, and then he was gone. The door closed behind him, but the air in the room remained charged with something new, something unspoken. Emma stared down at the pages of the little engine that could, running her fingers over the bold words. For the first time, she truly understood what they meant. The moment Donald Trump stepped out of Bright Horizons kindergarten, the real battle began not in the classroom, but in the digital world, where perception was molded, twisted, and sold before the truth had a chance to catch up. The convoy of black SUVs moved smoothly down the road, but inside Trump's vehicle, the air was charged. Jason Carter, his senior communications advisor, was glued to his phone, fingers flying across the screen. He had been in the game long enough to know how this worked. What started as a simple visit would be turned into something else before they even reached their next stop. All right, Jason muttered, his brows furrowing. Let's see how bad it is. He scrolled through the early media reactions, the first takes from political commentators and journalists who hadn't even seen the full footage yet. They didn't need to. They already knew the angle they were going with. Unusual visit raises eyebrows. Trump's message to children sparks questions. A former president walking into a kindergarten is a headline on its own. But what happened inside? Some say it was inspiring. Others say it was unsettling. Teachers reportedly caught off guard as Trump delivers unexpected lesson on perseverance. Jason exhaled sharply. They're being careful for now. They're not attacking outright, but they're planting seeds, Trump smirked. Give it an hour. It wouldn't take that long. As Jason scrolled, the online reaction was already shifting. A snippet from the visit had been clipped and uploaded, quickly gaining traction. But it wasn't the full moment. It was edited, cut down to just a few seconds. Trump leaning in toward the little girl, saying, People told me I couldn't do a lot of things. But you know what I told them. Just watch me. No context. No mention of the book. No mention of the little engine that could. Below the video, reactions flooded in. Was this a campaign speech? To a 4-year-old, imagine your kid getting a TED Talk on winning from Trump. Wild. What exactly was the point of this visit? What did these kids actually gain? Jason clenched his jaw. They clipped it. They took 2 sentences and made it look like you walked into a preschool and started bragging. Trump let out a dry laugh. Unbelievable, but not surprising. He glanced at Daniel Graves, his media strategist, seated across from him. What's cable news saying? Daniel had 3 live feeds running on his tablet, different networks, different angles, but the same game. One network had a panel of commentators already dissecting the visit. Look, I think we can all agree, talking to kids about believing in themselves is one thing. But this? It felt more like a rally speech than a classroom visit, Another anchor took a more measured approach. This visit is already dividing people. Some are saying it was a genuine moment. Others see it as another example of Trump making everything about himself. And then there were the more aggressive voices. This raises serious concerns. What's the agenda here? What's the bigger picture? Jason shook his head. They're not attacking outright yet, but they're letting the speculation run wild. They don't have to say it. They just let people fill in the blanks. Trump leaned back in his seat, studying the ceiling. So, what's the play? Jason took a breath. We need to get ahead of this. If we let the narrative run wild, it cements itself. He turned his phone to show another developing thread. But here's the thing, some real people are already pushing back. One post stood out among the noise. I was there. I saw the whole thing. The kids loved it. He talked to them, encouraged them, and actually listened. The media is cutting this down to fit their story. Jason grinned. This is gold. We don't even have to defend you. Let the people who were there do it. Trump nodded. Good. Push it. And release the full, unedited clip before they twist it any further. Daniel tapped his tablet. Fox already reached out. They'll air it if we send it over. Jason sent the file with a single press of a button. Done, but the machine was already moving. The same media that framed the story in one way would now have to deal with the full reality. As the SUV continued down the road, Jason's phone buzzed again. Another news alert. New footage released. Was Trump's visit misrepresented? Jason smirked. And just like that, they have to backtrack. Trump glanced out the window at the passing cityscape. They always do. Inside the media war room, analysts and producers were scrambling. The real footage was out there now. The unindictment. People were watching for themselves, comparing it to what had been spun. The narrative was shifting. And for Trump, this wasn't just about winning a news cycle. It was about reminding America who really controlled the truth. The war over perception was in full swing. By the time Donald Trump stepped off the stage at his rally, the kindergarten visit had become one of the most talked about moments in America. What started as a simple, heartfelt exchange between a former president and a child had exploded into a national conversation about media manipulation, truth, and the power of the people. But this wasn't just about one event, it was about something bigger. As the night wore on, back in the campaign headquarters, the team watched in real time how the media was scrambling. They had spent the entire day trying to control the story, but now they were on the defensive. Jason Carter sat at the long table, his phone lighting up with fresh updates. New polls were being released. He read them aloud. 54% of independents say they now trust the mainstream media less after seeing how they covered the kindergarten visit, he reported, shaking his head in disbelief. 61% say they believe Trump was treated unfairly. And get this, 78% of conservatives say the media's reaction actually made them more likely to support him. Daniel Graves, still monitoring cable news, let out a low chuckle. They overplayed their hand. And now they're trying to walk it back. One anchor, clearly struggling to keep the narrative intact, was saying, "Look, we're not saying Trump did anything wrong, per se." But the reaction to this story shows just how much the country remains divided. Jason smirked. Translation: we got caught, but we'll never admit it. Daniel clicked over to another network. A roundtable discussion was in progress. Maybe this should be a lesson for all of us, one panelist suggested cautiously. Maybe we need to be more careful about jumping to conclusions before all the facts are in. Jason leaned back. Unbelievable. Now they're acting like they want to be fair. Trump, sitting across the room, simply nodded. He had seen this game played out 100 times before. They lied. The truth got out. And now they were pretending to be objective just to save face. But it was too late. The American people had already seen what they needed to see. As the media backpedaled, something powerful was happening. Ordinary Americans, not politicians, not journalists, not campaign strategists, but everyday people were leading the conversation now. On social media, they were calling out the deception, posting their own analyses, comparing clips, exposing the blatant dishonesty for all to see. One viral post from a school teacher read, "I don't care who you support, if you watched the full video, you know the media deliberately twisted it." That's the real scandal here. Another from a veteran. "I served this country to protect freedom, including the freedom to think for yourself. Watch the real clip and decide for yourself. Don't let the media tell you what to believe." Even people who weren't Trump supporters were speaking up. "I never voted for Trump. Probably never will. But after seeing the way they butchered this story, yeah, the media has a serious credibility problem." That was the real win. Not just Trump's supporters waking up, but the undecided, the skeptical, the ones who had been conditioned to believe everything they were told until they saw this for themselves. The media didn't just lose control of the narrative. They lost trust. And trust, once broken, is nearly impossible to repair. Later that night, the team gathered around in the campaign war room, a quiet sense of victory in the air. Jason looked up from his screen. "Fox wants to schedule a sit-down interview with you to talk about the media's reaction," Daniel added. "So does Newsmax. And we've got 3 major podcasts requesting you as a guest." Trump nodded. "We'll get to it." He leaned forward, hands clasped. "But we don't need to chase this story anymore. It's already out of their hands." And he was right. By now, people weren't waiting for permission from news anchors or commentators. They were doing their own research, making up their own minds. And that was the real victory. Not fighting back against the media's lies, but proving that the lies don't work anymore. Trump stood, buttoning his jacket. He looked around the room at his team, then out the window at the city lights beyond. "This isn't just about me," he said, voice calm but certain. "It's about every single American who's been lied to, who's been told they're crazy for questioning things, who's been silenced for telling the truth." He turned back to them, his expression set in stone. "This fight isn't just political. It's personal. And we're going to win." A quiet murmur of agreement ran through the room. Because for the first time in years, something was shifting. People weren't just waking up, they were speaking up. And the louder they got, the less control the media had. This story isn't just about Donald Trump. It's about you. If you've ever felt like you weren't getting the full truth, if you've ever seen the media twist reality right before your eyes, if you've ever been told what to think instead of given the facts, then you already know what's at stake. This isn't about politics. It's about freedom. The freedom to question. The freedom to think for yourself. The freedom to fight back when the truth is under attack. And that fight is far from over. So now you have a choice. You can sit back, let the media tell you what to believe, or you can join the movement. If you're done being lied to, if you believe the American people deserve better, then stand with us. Subscribe. Stay informed. Share this message. Because this isn't just a moment. It's the beginning of something bigger. And together, we're taking back the truth.